I'd spent a decade learning to silence the beast that lived under my skin, choking it down with silver dust and iron will. But as the alpha's gaze locked onto mine, his lips curling into a possessive snarl, I felt its ancient golden eyes snap open in the darkness of my soul. Chapter 1. The Weight of Oil and Paper Grease. It lived under her fingernails, a permanent gritty perfume. It clung to her clothes, stained the lines in her palms. Solara tightened the final bolt on the engine block, the cold metal groaning in protest. The scent of motor oil was the smell of survival, the taste of scraping by, the sound of another day won. A day Finn wouldn't have to worry. That thought, and that thought alone, kept the exhaustion from finally dragging her under. Just as she wiped a slick hand on an already ruined rag, the shop door creaked open. A sliver of the dreary, gray afternoon sliced into the garage. And him. Finn stood there, all sharp angles and oversized school blazer, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. He didn't look at her, not at first. His gaze was fixed on the crumpled piece of paper in his hands, his knuckles, bone white. "What is it?" Her voice came out rough, rusty from disuse. He finally looked up, and the shame in his eyes was a physical blow, worse than any punch she'd ever taken. It's the final notice, Lyra." He held it out, an offering, a surrender. She took the paper, her calloused fingers smudged the stark red ink. Final notice. Tuition overdue. The numbers swam before her eyes, a mocking, impossible sum. A wall she couldn't climb, a river she couldn't cross, a debt she couldn't pay. Because she had to pay it. She had to. There was no other option. Finn's education was their only way out of this border town purgatory. His mind was his gift, and she'd kill to protect it. "It's fine," she lied, her voice a low growl. She forced her face into a mask of indifference, a trick her mother had taught her. "Never let them see you bleed, little wolf. They'll only smell the blood." "It's not fine," Finn whispered, his voice cracking. "I heard Mr. Davies talking. They'll expel me on Monday." Monday. 2 days. A cold dread, slick and oily, coiled in her gut. She had nothing. Every cent from the last job went to rent, to the flickering lights overhead. There was no one to ask, no one to borrow from. She was an outsider, a rogue-born stray living on the edge of the human world, trusted by no one. That was the price of freedom, wasn't it? To be utterly, terrifyingly alone. Just as the silence in the garage became a screaming thing, the gruff voice of Old Man Hemlock cut through the tension. He didn't look up. He just spoke to the pile of rusted metal in front of him. "Heard they're holding a purse match down at the pit tonight." He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into a bucket. "Winner take all. Enough to solve a lot of problems." He paused, finally glancing at her from under his bushy gray eyebrows. "Or make a whole lot of new ones." The pit. A place of broken bones and shattered dreams, where shifters and desperate humans alike went to tear each other apart for cash. A place of savagery. A place without rules. A place she swore she'd never go. But as she looked at Finn's terrified face, at the piece of paper that was a death sentence for his future, she knew her promise meant nothing. Nothing at all. Because she would walk into any hell for him. She tucked the notice into her pocket, the paper crinkling like a dying leaf. "Stay here tonight, Finn. Lock the door behind me." The decision settled in her bones, cold and heavy as steel, pushing her toward the darkness that waited just beyond the garage door. Chapter 2. The Fury in the Cage. The air in the pit didn't just smell bad, it was an assault. A thick, wet stench of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and something coppery that could only be blood. It coated the back of Solara's throat, a taste of pure desperation. Down here in the city's concrete guts, growls were a language, and violence was the currency. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat, against the roar of the crowd. But on the outside, ice. She moved through the throng of snarling, jeering bodies with a blank face, her gaze fixed on the chain-link cage in the center of the room. A cage for animals. And tonight, so was she. Her opponent was a mountain of a man, a bear shifter by the scent of him, all damp earth and raw muscle. He grinned at her, a cocky, predatory smirk that promised pain. The crowd roared his name. They screamed insults at her. "Scrawny bitch! Go home, little girl! Let them scream!" Fear was a weapon, and she'd learned long ago how to turn it back on them. She met the bear's eyes and gave him nothing. No fear, no anger, just a void. The bell shrieked. He came at her like a freight train, all brute force, no finesse. She moved like smoke. She dodged his first clumsy swing, the wind of it whistling past her ear. Her body was a coil of wire, tight and ready to spring. She moved with the grace of a phantom, the precision of an executioner, the fury of a wolf protecting its own. That fury was a cold, clean fire inside her, burning for Finn. She didn't use her claws, not fully. That was a line she wouldn't cross. Not here. But she let the predator out. She let the wolf guide her. Her senses sharpened. Until she could smell his sweat. See the frantic pulse beating in his thick neck. Hear the tiny hitch in his breath as he started to realize his mistake. Because he was big, but she was fast. Because he was strong, but she was smarter. A jab to the throat. A kick to the knee that buckled his leg with a wet crack. An elbow to the temple that sent him staggering back, his eyes glazed with surprise. The crowd's jeers. They died, replaced by a stunned, hungry silence. He roared in frustration and lunged, finally letting his own beast surface. His features began to blur, his hands thickening into paws. Too late. Solara ducked under his wild swing, planted her feet and drove her palm up under his chin with every ounce of strength she possessed. His head snapped back with a sickening thud, and the mountain fell. Silence. Then, an explosion of sound. She stood over him, breathing hard, the prize money already a ghost in her pocket. As she turned to leave, two voices cut through the noise. Two Frostfang warriors, their pack markings stark on their necks. "Can't believe the Alpha is letting the pup die," one muttered. "Just a kid." The other scoffed. "Rogueborn. What do you expect? Besides, no one has any silver-laced wolfsbane antidote. That poison is a death sentence." Solara froze. A pup. Dying. The words echoed in the space where her heart was supposed to be. She had the money. She had won. But as she pushed her way out of the suffocating heat of the pit, a new and terrible choice began to take root in the back of her mind. Its thorns digging deep. Chapter 3. The Cost of Kindness. The prize money. A dirty, crumpled weight in her pocket. It felt both heavier and lighter than she'd imagined. A stack of bills thick with the promise of Finn's future, but stained with the memory of violence. Solara walked through the rain-slicked back streets, neon signs bleeding into the puddles at her feet. She should have gone straight home. Handed the money to Finn. Watched the relief wash over his face. Instead, her feet carried her to a part of the city that smelled of strange herbs and desperation. The apothecary was a tiny, cramped shop tucked between a pawn store and a noodle bar, its windows clouded with grime. A small, withered man with eyes like chips of flint peered at her over a pair of crooked spectacles. "I need an antidote," she said, her voice low. "For wolfsbane, the kind laced with silver nitrate." The man's eyes narrowed. "That's a dark poison, and the cure is rare, expensive." He named a price that made the air leave her lungs. It was everything. Finn's tuition, Finn's future, all of it. For a moment, she just stood there, the world tilting on its axis. What was she doing? She didn't know this pup. It wasn't her problem. Her only problem, her only purpose, was Finn. A flicker of memory, sharp and unwanted, surfaced. Her mother, years ago, kneeling in the dirt to gently splint the wing of a fallen crow. Even the lost things deserve a little kindness, Lyra. Her mother's kindness hadn't saved her. It had gotten her killed. And yet, Solara could see the pup in her mind's eye. Small, alone. Dying from a poison meant to inflict maximum pain. What kind of monster did that to a child? Could she really walk away, knowing she held the cure in her hands, knowing she could stop that pain? Damn it all. With a hand that trembled slightly, she pulled the wad of cash from her pocket and slammed it onto the counter. Give it to me. The apothecary's greedy little eyes lit up. He disappeared into the back and returned with a small lead-lined vial filled with a shimmering silver liquid. The cure. Holding it felt like holding a bomb. Minutes later, she was back out in the cold night, the rain plastering her hair to her face. The money was gone. All of it. The weight in her pocket had been replaced by a cold, heavy dread in her stomach. She was a fool, an idiot, chasing the ghost of her mother's compassion. She knew where she had to go. The Frostfang territory started just beyond the northern woods, an invisible line that no rogue in their right mind would ever cross. To enter their land uninvited was to beg for death. But she had to, because walking away would be a different kind of death. A hollowing out of whatever small part of her soul was still good. The edge of the forest was dark, silent. The air grew colder here, the scent of pine and damp earth thick with something else. Something wild and territorial. Power. She clutched the vial, its cold surface a stark contrast to the burning, reckless decision in her heart. She took a deep breath and stepped across the border. A tremor, not from the cold, washed over her as she moved deeper into a world that despised her very existence. Chapter 4. The False Claim. The forest swallowed her whole. One moment she was on the edge of the human world. The next, she was trespassing on land that hummed with an ancient, predatory power. The air itself was different here, heavier, scented with pine, cold stone, and the unmistakable musk of a dominant wolf pack. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run, but the image of a dying pup, a ghost she couldn't shake, pushed her forward. She moved like a shadow between the colossal trees, the precious vial cold against her skin, her ears straining against the oppressive silence. It was the silence that undid her. There was no warning, no snapped twig, no rustle of leaves, just a sudden suffocating presence. They materialized from the gloom like specters, 4 massive warriors clad in dark leather, the silver and black insignia of the Frostfang pack emblazoned on their arms. Their eyes glowed with a faint, chilling light in the twilight. "A stray," one of them growled, the sound a low rumble of contempt. His eyes raked over her, dismissing her instantly. And a stupid one at that. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed at her. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She stood her ground, her chin lifted, because her mother had taught her that begging was a death sentence. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I brought medicine for a sick child." The leader, a hulking brute with a jagged scar bisecting his eyebrow, laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the trees. "Medicine?" He snatched the vial from her hand, sniffing it before tucking it into his belt. "The Alpha will decide what happens with this, and with you." They dragged her. Her feet scrambled for purchase on the damp earth as they half-carried, half-pulled her through the woods and into a clearing. A settlement, not of wood and brick, but of dark stone and towering pines lit by the flickering orange glare of torches. The entire pack was gathered in a central square, their faces turned toward a raised dais. An air of tense, almost feverish anticipation hung over the crowd. What was this? What ritual had she stumbled into? They shoved her toward the front, forcing her to her knees before the stone platform. And then she saw him. He was the epitome of an Alpha's son, impossibly handsome, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes as cold and gray as a winter sky. Arrogance radiated from him like heat. This was Kale, son of Alpha Valerius. He descended the steps, a small, ornate pouch in his hand. "On your feet, rogue," he commanded. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she obeyed. Kyle circled her, his gaze clinical, as if inspecting livestock. He opened the pouch, and a strange, cloyingly sweet scent filled the air. A scent that made her wolf whimper and her human mind fog over. A wolf-binding herb. But it felt wrong. Tainted. Artificial. He dabbed the crushed leaves onto his pulse points, then onto hers. "The moon goddess works in mysterious ways," he announced to the silent crowd, his voice ringing with false piety. "Tonight she has blessed me. She has shown me my fated mate." A jolt, electric and nauseating, shot through her. A fake bond conjured by the herb slammed into her senses. It was a hollow echo of the real thing, a sickening lie that her body was being forced to accept. The pack gasped. This was it. The reason for the ceremony? A public claiming. But why her? A nobody? A stray? Kyle leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. His whisper was for her alone, a serpent's hiss dripping with venom. "Smile, little stray. You're about to be a part of history." Then he stepped back, his expression shifting from triumph to one of pure theatrical disgust. He raised his voice for all to hear, a cruel, booming declaration. "I, Kale of the Frostfang Pack, accept this gift from the goddess." He paused, letting the tension build until it was a physical thing. He looked directly at her, his beautiful face contorted into a mask of revulsion. "And I reject it." A collective shockwave rolled through the pack. "I reject this weak, honorless, rogue-born filth," he screamed, his voice cracking with feigned outrage. "She is nothing, unworthy of our name, unworthy of our blood, unworthy of the air she breathes. Let this be a lesson to all. The Frostfang Pack is pure. We will not be tainted." The fake bond didn't just fade, it shattered. The psychic backlash was agony, 1,000 shards of glass ripping through her soul. She cried out, stumbling back, and the pack descended. A blur of fists and feet. Pain exploded behind her eyes, in her ribs, across her face. They kicked and clawed and spat on her, their earlier anticipation turned to a frenzied, righteous violence. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Kale's triumphant smirk, illuminated by the fire of the torches. A king on his stage. Chapter 5. The Unbreakable Spirit. Pain was the first thing. A deep, throbbing agony that seemed to live in her very bones. It was a cold and bitter dawn, the sky a bruised purple-gray. Snow, thin and wet, fell on her face, melting on her split lips, tasting of blood. She tried to move, and a raw scream tore from her throat, swallowed by the vast, empty wilderness. They had left her, dumped in the desolate stretch of no man's land between the territories, like a piece of trash. A broken toy. The memory of the rejection, the searing shame, the shattering pain of the false bond, the snarling faces of the pack, crashed over her. They hadn't just beaten her body. They had tried to break her spirit, to grind it into dust and leave it for the crows. Despair was a freezing tide, pulling her under. It would be so easy to just stop. To close her eyes and let the cold take her. To let the darkness that nibbled at the edges of her vision finally win. No more pain, no more fighting. Peace. Never let them see you bleed, little wolf. Her mother's voice. A faint whisper in the wind. They'll only smell the blood. Something inside her shifted. The tide of despair hesitated. A new feeling, hot and powerful, began to smolder in the pit of her stomach. It started as a spark. A single, defiant ember. Finn. His face appeared in her mind's eye, his trusting eyes, his quiet hope. He was waiting for her. He believed in her. She had made a promise to him, a silent vow that she would always, always come back. She couldn't protect him if she was dead. She couldn't keep him safe if she gave up. The ember of fury roared into a bonfire. How dare they? How dare they think they could break her? They didn't know her. They didn't know the steel that had been forged in her spine by years of hardship. They didn't know the promises she carried in her heart. She would not die here, not today. With a grunt that was half pain and half rage, she began to move. Her leg was broken, the bone grated with a sickening crunch, so she couldn't stand. She had to crawl. One arm at a time, she dragged her shattered body through the snow. Every movement was a fresh wave of agony. Her ribs screamed, her head pounded. The world swam in and out of focus. But she kept going. She focused on the rage. It was a fuel, cleaner and hotter than any desperation. She fed it with the memory of Kale's sneer, with the sound of the pack's laughter, with the sting of their spittle on her face. They wanted her to be weak. She would show them strength. They wanted her to be broken. She would show them defiance. They left her for dead. She would live out of pure, undiluted spite, inch by agonizing inch, foot by bloody foot. She clawed her way through the snow, leaving a dark trail behind her. The cold seeped into her, a deep, numbing chill that promised oblivion. Her vision blurred. Her movements grew sluggish. The fire of her rage was the only thing keeping her core warm. She didn't know how long she'd been crawling. Hours? A lifetime? The sun was a pale, watery disk in the sky. Her strength was failing. The darkness was coming back, this time with a gentle, seductive whisper. Just rest for a moment. No. She lifted her head, a snarl tearing at her raw throat, and that's when she saw it. Far in the distance, a shape, black against the endless white of the snow. A rider on a massive, dark horse, as still and silent as a statue carved from obsidian. It cast a long, menacing shadow that seemed to stretch all the way to where she lay, a promise of either salvation or a much quicker death.
Chapter 6. The Ruthless Savior. Dracor reined in his warhorse Onyx, the stallion's breath pluming in the frigid air. The border of his territory, the Blackwood Pack, was quiet. Too quiet. He could smell the lingering stink of the Frostfang's theatrics from the night before, a cloying scent of cheap magic and mob hysteria. He despised Alpha Valerius and his pompous son, Kael. Their obsession with purity was a cancer, a weakness disguised as strength. True strength was control. It was order. It was absolute unyielding power. His gaze swept the desolate expanse of snow that separated his lands from theirs. And then he saw it. A smudge of darkness marring the pristine white. A broken thing. His first instinct was cold and pragmatic. A rogue. Probably the one Kael had used in his little morality play. She'd gotten what strays who wander into packlands deserve. The law of the wild was simple. The weak perish. It was not his concern. He had an entire territory to run, a network of alliances to maintain, and enemies on all sides. He did not have time for broken things. He almost turned Onyx around. But something stayed his hand. A flicker of movement, a lift of a head. He nudged his horse closer, his senses on high alert. The scent of blood was sharp on the wind, but underneath it was something else. Something stubborn. He stopped a dozen yards away, observing. She was a wreck. Utterly destroyed. Her clothes were shredded, her body a canvas of bruises and blood. One of her legs was bent at an unnatural angle. On her neck, crudely burned into the skin, was the Frostfang's mark of rejection. A broken fang. A symbol of ultimate shame. She should have been weeping, or dead. Instead, she was trying to crawl, and as he watched, she lifted her head and glared at him. Through the pain, through the blood and the swelling. Her eyes burned with a defiant fire he had not seen in a very, very long time. She couldn't even manage a proper sound, but a broken, guttural snarl escaped her lips. A warning. From her, to him. And in that moment, the world tilted. The snow, the wind, the scent of blood, it all faded away, replaced by a memory he kept buried under a mountain of ice and discipline. A different woman, same fire in her eyes. His mother. She stood before the High Council, a rogue-born healer accused of treason, her chin held high. They had called her weak, unfit, tainted. They had stripped her of her rank and cast her out, but she had never once begged, never once broken. Her last words to him whispered in secret before she left forever. Promise me, Dracor. Promise me you will build a world where strength isn't measured by cruelty, where defiance is honored, not punished. He had built his pack on a foundation of ruthless efficiency and absolute strength because he believed it was the only way to honor that promise. To become so powerful that no one could ever again cast out someone for being different. But looking at the girl in the snow, was this what he had become? An alpha who would leave a defiant spirit to die simply because it was easier? Had he mistaken cruelty for strength after all? The promise he made to his mother felt like a brand on his soul. He dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. The girl flinched, trying to drag herself away, her fear warring with her fury. "Stay back," she rasped, her voice a shredded ruin. He ignored her. She was a complication he didn't need, a problem he had no time for. She was a stray who had brought this on herself. But she was also a fighter. She had a spine of iron. And she had looked at him, an alpha lord on his warhorse, and had chosen to snarl rather than grovel. He reached down, his movements economical and sure. He slid one arm under her back and another beneath her knees, lifting her from the snow. She was impossibly light, a bundle of sharp bones and simmering rage. She struggled weakly in his arms, a wounded wolf caught in a steel trap. "Let me go. Be silent," he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that tolerated no argument. "You have two choices. You can die here in the snow, or you can live in my fortress. The choice is yours, but I will not leave you to the vultures." He carried her back to Onyx, settling her in front of him on the saddle. She was rigid with tension, with hatred. He could feel it radiating from her. Good. Hatred was a fire. It would keep her alive. As Onyx began the steady trek back toward his territory, she saw it for the first time, the dark, imposing silhouette of his fortress carved into the side of a mountain, a citadel of black stone and jagged peaks, not a sanctuary, a prison, and she was its newest
Chapter
captive.
7. The Cage of Stone and Silk. She woke up to silence. A deep, profound quiet that was nothing like the screaming agony she'd fallen into. The pain was gone. Not completely, but muted. A dull, distant ache where a roaring fire had been. Her first breath didn't feel like swallowing glass. It tasted of clean linen and wood smoke. She opened her eyes, and panic, cold and immediate, seized her. This wasn't a healer's tent. This wasn't a dungeon. She was in a bed, a massive bed with furs so soft they felt like liquid silk against her skin. A fire crackled in a cavernous stone hearth across the room, casting dancing shadows on towering bookshelves and dark, imposing furniture. A gilded cage, and through a vast, unbarred window, she saw nothing but a swirling vortex of white, a blizzard, a wall of snow sealing them in. Them. He was there, the alpha from the snow. He stood by the window, a silhouette of immense power staring out at the storm. He was dressed in simple black trousers and a tunic that did little to hide the sheer breadth of his shoulders or the coiled strength in his frame. He hadn't looked at her, hadn't acknowledged her. But she felt his presence like a physical weight in the room. "Where am I?" Her voice was a dry rasp. He turned slowly. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, shot through with silver, intense, assessing, inhumanly still. "You are in my fortress, in my territory." His voice was a low baritone, a gravelly rumble that vibrated in her bones. "You are safe." Safe? The word was a mockery. She was a prisoner, a stray brought to the den of a bigger, more dangerous predator. She tried to sit up to pull herself away from the unnerving comfort of the bed, but her body protested with a sharp, searing jolt in her ribs. "Do not move," he commanded. Not a suggestion, an order. Your leg is set, but 3 of your ribs are fractured. You were thoroughly beaten. The memory crashed back in. Kyle's sneer, the pack's fury, the humiliation. A hot, bitter shame washed over her. She pushed it down, replacing it with the cold, hard shield of her anger. I didn't ask for your help. No, he agreed, his expression unreadable. You did not. He crossed the room, his movements silent and fluid. He held a bowl of water and clean bandages. He stopped at her bedside and she flinched away, every muscle in her body screaming to fight or flee. He simply waited, his patience a more terrifying weapon than any snarl. Defeated, she lay still, her jaw tight with resentment as he began to unwrap the old dressing on her shoulder. His hands were large, calloused, yet his touch was surprisingly gentle, clinical. He worked with an unnerving focus, his gaze fixed on his task. But then his fingers brushed against her neck, against the ugly burned flesh of the rejection mark, and the world stopped. It wasn't a thought. It was a feeling. A sudden, violent jolt of pure energy that arced between them. A shock of recognition so profound it stole her breath. It was a deep, resonant hum that vibrated from her soul, a primal chord that recognized its counterpart in him. It was nothing like the sick, artificial pull of Kale's herb. This was real, terrifyingly, undeniably real. His fingers froze on her skin. His head snapped up, his stormy eyes locking with hers. She saw a flicker of raw shock in their depths, a crack in his icy control. Mate, the word wasn't hers. It was the howl of the beast inside her, the one she kept chained in the dark, a beast that had just recognized its other half.
Chapter 8. The Mended Locket. The storm was a wild beast, clawing at the stone walls of his fortress. For 3 days it had raged, imprisoning him with the stray. Dracor stood before the fire, the heat doing nothing to thaw the disquiet in his soul. He could feel her across the room, a restless, defiant energy that pulsed under the surface of her wounded stillness. And he could feel the bond. It was a low, constant hum beneath his skin, a faint pull toward her that his iron will had to actively, constantly suppress. He had not known a true mate bond in his life and had never wanted one. They were a weakness, a vulnerability, an emotional liability he could not afford. And yet, here it was, tethering him to a broken rogue he'd saved on a whim driven by the ghost of a promise to his mother. This was a complication of the highest order. She was healing at an unnatural rate, her shifter physiology knitting bone and mending tissue with startling speed. By the 4th day she was pacing, a caged wolf, her movements stiff but determined, her eyes narrowed with suspicion every time he looked at her. I won't be your prisoner, she finally bit out, her voice stronger now. And I won't be a charity case, I repay my debts. He turned from the fire, raising a single, unimpressed brow. And how do you propose to do that? Give me something to do, something to earn my keep until I can leave. Her chin was high, her pride a tangible thing. It was that pride, that same unbreakable defiance, that had made him bring her here in the first place. He was curious. What else was she made of? Very well, he conceded, a flicker of an idea taking shape. The pack forge is always in need of an extra hand. Try not to break anything. He led her down through the winding stone corridors to the heart of the mountain, where the forge roared day and night. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and hot metal. He left her with the forge master, a burly, one-eyed wolf named Ulf, with a simple command: let her work. From the shadows of the upper gallery, Dracor watched. He expected her to be clumsy, out of place. Instead, she moved with a quiet, practiced confidence. She sorted scrap, cleaned tools, and even began mending a broken hinge with a skill that was both precise and efficient. Her hands, which he knew could deliver brutal, disabling blows, were steady and sure. Then she found it. In a dusty crate of discarded items, she pulled out a small, tarnished object. A silver locket, shaped like a crescent moon. Its hinge was broken, its surface dented and dull. He felt his breath catch in his throat. It was his mother's. The only thing he had left of her. He had given it to Ulf years ago, hoping it could be fixed, but the delicate mechanism was beyond repair. But the girl, she didn't seem to think so. She sat with it, her brow furrowed in concentration. Using a set of fine tools, she worked with a jeweler's focus. An hour passed, then another. He watched, mesmerized, as she gently coaxed the bent silver back into shape, meticulously cleaning away decades of tarnish, and somehow fixing the broken clasp. She held it up, a perfect gleaming silver moon resting in her palm. Whole. He felt a shock go through him, so profound it was like a physical blow. He had seen her as a fighter, a survivor, a problem. But in this quiet moment, he saw something else entirely. A creator, a mender of broken things. It was a gentleness, a quiet strength that his ruthless world had no place for. And it shook him to his very core, because this stray was becoming something far more dangerous than an inconvenience.
Chapter 9. The Border Town Test. The storm finally broke on the 5th day, leaving the world hushed and buried under a thick blanket of white. The silence in the fortress felt different now. Heavier, charged with the unspoken thing that had sparked between them, the mate bond she refused to acknowledge. Solara's body was nearly healed, but her spirit was a raw nerve. She needed to get out. Away from his suffocating presence, away from the unnerving pull that made her skin hum whenever he was near. As if sensing her restlessness, Dracor found her staring out at the snow-covered mountains. "Your debt is not yet paid," he stated, his voice as cool and crisp as the morning air. She whirled on him, her temper flaring. "I fixed every broken tool in your forge. What more do you want?" He held out a sealed, unmarked scroll. "I have an errand for you. A message to be delivered to an informant in Grey Creek." Grey Creek. A wretched, neutral ground town on the border of 3 territories. It was a haven for criminals, mercenaries, and exiles, a place where a lone wolf could get her throat slit for looking at someone the wrong way. This wasn't an errand. It was a test. He wanted to see if she'd break, or run. "Fine," she snapped, snatching the scroll from his hand. The thought of freedom, even for a few hours, was a heady lure, because she would deliver his stupid message, and then she would keep on walking. She would disappear. "You will return before nightfall," he added, as if reading her mind. "Or my warriors will hunt you down, and they will not be as gentle as I have been." The threat hung in the air between them, cold and sharp. The journey to Grey Creek was tense. She felt eyes on her the entire way, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck that told her she wasn't alone. He was watching. Of course he was. The town was even worse than she remembered. A collection of ramshackle buildings leaning against each other for support, spewing smoke and the smell of cheap ale into the air. Shifters of every kind watched her pass, their eyes filled with suspicion and predatory interest. She kept her head down, her hand resting on the knife hidden in her boot, and walked straight to the seedy tavern Dracor had described. She passed the scroll to a grim-faced bartender, who took it without a word and slid a small, heavy purse of coins back in return. Payment. So, she was a courier now. As she turned to leave, a voice called her name. "Solara? Sylara Vane?" She froze. Standing by a shadowy table was a man she hadn't seen in years, Ryden, a wolf shifter she'd run with briefly, back before she'd settled near the human town. He was smiling, his face open and friendly. "Ryden?" she said, her voice tight with caution. "What are you doing here?" "A little of this, a little of that," he said with a casual shrug. "Surviving. Like you. It's good to see you, Lyra. I heard a rumor you'd run into some trouble with the Frostfang pack." His eyes held a flicker of something she couldn't quite read. Was it pity? or something else. Rumors are just rumors, she said, already backing away. I have to go. Something about his smile felt wrong, a little too wide, a little too knowing. She dismissed it as paranoia. This place made everyone twitchy. But the feeling of unease lingered, a cold stone in her gut, all the way back to Dracor's fortress. She arrived just as the sun dipped below the mountains, throwing the purse of coins onto a table before the silent, waiting Alpha. She had passed his test. But as he looked from the coins to her face, his stormy eyes searching hers, she didn't feel free. She felt like she'd just walked deeper into the trap. Chapter 10. Sparring and Sparks. The training yard had become their battlefield. It started because she couldn't stand the stillness, the feeling of being a pampered pet in a stone cage. It became something else, something dangerous and necessary and utterly addictive. The smack of wooden practice swords against each other was the only conversation they seemed capable of having. Today was different. He was pushing her, harder than usual. You're sloppy, Dracor grunted, his powerful frame a blur of motion as he parried her strike, the force of it jarring her down to her bones. You rely on speed, but your foundation is weak. Again! His voice was a lash, but it was his presence that consumed her. The scent of him, clean earth, cold iron, and a wild, musky scent that was purely him, filled her lungs with every ragged breath. Sweat slicked her skin, her muscles burned, and beneath it all, the bond hummed. A low, insistent thrum of awareness that made every feint a caress, every block an embrace. She lunged, putting her whole body into the attack, a spin that should have caught him off guard. He wasn't there. He moved with a speed that defied his size, flowing around her attack like smoke. Before she could recover, his arm snaked around her waist, yanking her back against his chest. Her body slammed into a wall of solid muscle. The wooden sword clattered from her numb fingers. He was behind her, his heat scorching her through her thin tunic, his arm a steel band across her stomach. One hand held her captive. The other tilted her head to the side, exposing the sensitive skin of her neck. She froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. You left yourself open, he murmured, his breath a hot caress against her ear. A fatal mistake. His face dipped lower. His lips brushed the column of her throat, and she felt it, the sharp points of his canines grazing her skin. Not a bite, not a claim, just a ghost of a touch, a promise. And the bond roared. It exploded from a low hum into a deafening, blinding inferno of pure, possessive energy. It screamed through her veins, demanding, claiming, marking. Her breath hitched. A whimper, soft and needy, escaped her lips. A sound she didn't recognize. A sound of surrender. His whole body went rigid against hers. A low, guttural growl vibrated from his chest, an involuntary sound of pure, primal possession. For a heartbeat, the world ceased to exist. There was only the heat, the scent, the impossible, undeniable rightness of this. Alpha! The voice, sharp and laced with disapproval, shattered the moment. They sprang apart as if burned. Solara stumbled back, her skin tingling, her mind a chaotic whirl. Standing at the edge of the training yard was a pack elder, a grim-faced she-wolf named Alara, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed in judgment. She had seen everything. This display is inappropriate, Alara declared, her gaze fixed on Sylara with open hostility. The stray has been here for weeks. She eats our food, sleeps under our alpha's protection, yet she is not one of us. She has not proven herself. Dracor's face was a thundercloud, his jaw tight. She is under my protection. That is all the proof you need. It is not enough, the elder snapped. Tradition demands a trial, the run of the moon. Let her prove she has the strength and cunning of the Blackwood Pack, or let the forest claim her. A trial. A death sentence. Solara looked at Dracor, a silent plea in her eyes. Don't do this, but his face was stone. He looked from the rigid elder to Solara, his gaze lingering on her flushed face and the mark on her neck where his teeth had just been. His expression was unreadable, his decision absolute. "So be it," he said, his voice cold as the grave. "She will run." Chapter 11. The Run of the Moon. The moon was a shard of bone in the black, starless sky. It offered no comfort, only a cold, indifferent light that illuminated the faces of the hunters. And tonight, she was the prey. The entire pack was gathered at the edge of the forest. 10 of their best warriors stood ready, their bodies humming with the thrill of the chase. The Run of the Moon. A brutal tradition. Survive the night in their territory, evade their hunters, and reach the fortress gates by dawn. If they caught her. The elder's words echoed in her mind. Let the forest claim her. Solara stood alone, her fists clenched, a cold fury her only armor. She risked a glance at Dracor. He stood apart, a silent, imposing shadow, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He wouldn't help her. He wouldn't save her. He was letting this happen. The sting of betrayal was sharper than any fear. Fine. She didn't need him. She had never needed anyone. The Alpha's ceremonial horn blew, a long, mournful cry that signaled the start of the hunt. And she ran. She didn't sprint. She fled into the dark woods with a steady, ground-eating lope, her senses screaming with input. The snap of a twig to her left, the scent of a wolf on the wind to her right, the whisper of movement from behind. They were everywhere. They hunted as a pack, a coordinated net of predators closing in. But she was a lone wolf, and she knew how to think like one. She didn't run from them. She ran toward the most treacherous part of the territory, the Black River Gorge. It was a dangerous, winding canyon the pack warriors usually avoided. They thought in straight lines, in flanking maneuvers. They would expect her to run for the open woods. She would use their own land against them. For hours, it was a deadly game of cat and mouse. She scrambled over slick rocks, waded through ice-cold streams to hide her scent, and used narrow game trails they were too large to follow. She could hear their frustrated howls echoing through the gorge, the sound fueling her determination. They were strong. They were fast. They hunted with the power of the pack, but she was cunning, she was desperate, and she was fueled by a rage that burned brighter than the moon. As the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky a faint, bruised gray, she saw it, the dark silhouette of the fortress. She was close, so close. With the last of her strength, she burst from the tree line and sprinted across the open ground toward the main gate. The horn blew again, this time signaling the dawn, the end of the hunt. She had done it. She stood there, panting, her body aching and covered in scratches, but she was unbroken. She had won. The pack warriors emerged from the woods, their expressions not of anger but of grudging respect. Even Ilara, the elder, gave a slow, deliberate nod. In that moment, something shifted. She wasn't just the stray anymore. She was the wolf who had outrun the hunters. The quiet victory was shattered by the thunder of hooves. A lone rider bearing the silver and black banner of the Frostfang pack galloped up to the gate, his horse lathered in sweat. He threw a scroll at Dracor's feet. "A message from Alpha Valerius!" he spat. "He demands the return of his rejected filth! Give her back, or it is war!" Every eye turned to her. She felt the blood drain from her face. War. Because of her. Dracor didn't even look at the scroll. He fixed the messenger with a gaze as cold and hard as glacial ice. His voice was quiet, but it carried with absolute authority across the silent yard. "Tell your Alpha. No."
Chapter 12. Betrayal and Blood. The word war changed everything. It was no longer a matter of sheltering a stray. It was a matter of defending his territory against a rival Alpha's madness. Dracor sat in his study, a map of the borderlands spread before him, the threat from Frostfang a living, breathing thing in the room. His decision to refuse Valerius had been instant, instinctual. He would not be bullied. He would not surrender anyone under his protection, especially not her. Her performance in the run had been astonishing. He had watched from the battlements, a cold knot of something he refused to name tightening in his gut. He'd expected her to fail. Instead, she had shown a level of cunning and resilience that had earned the respect of his entire pack. It also made her more of a target. "We need to strengthen the northern patrols," he said to Gareth, his beta, who stood opposite the table. "And I want eyes on every new arrival. I want to know who they are, where they came from." His mind drifted to the newcomer, Ryden, the wolf from Grey Creek who had shown up 2 days ago, seeking refuge and swearing loyalty. He claimed to have fled Frostfang territory, disgusted by Alpha Valerius's tyranny. He had been particularly friendly toward Sylara, a fact that had stirred a possessive, illogical irritation in Dracor's gut. "I'll lead a patrol myself this evening," Dracor decided. "To the Whisperwood border. Gareth, you have command of the fortress. I'll take Ryden and a few others. See what he's made of." As dusk fell, they set out. The forest was quiet, the air crisp and cold. Sylara rode beside him, her back straight, her face a mask of determined focus. He had insisted she come. He needed her by his side. Ryden rode just behind them, laughing and sharing stories with the other warriors. He seemed at ease, too at ease. They reached a clearing deep in the Whisperwood, and Ryden suggested they pause. "Good vantage point here, Alpha. We can see for miles." It was the oldest trick in the book, and Dracor, distracted by the simmering tension between him and Sylara, had walked right into it. The ambush was sudden, vicious. At least a dozen Frostfang warriors erupted from the trees, arrows flying. One of his warriors went down with a choked cry. Ryden, the friendly newcomer, drew his blade and lunged, not at the enemy, but at Dracor. Betrayal, swift and sharp, pierced through the chaos. Dracor parried the blow, his sword ringing against Ryden's. "You traitorous dog!" "Valerius pays better," Ryden snarled, his face twisted in a hateful sneer. The world devolved into a blur of steel and snarling fury. Dracor was a whirlwind of death, his greatsword scything through his enemies, but they were outnumbered. He took a slash to the arm, another to his leg. They were trying to overwhelm him, to drag him down. And then he saw her. Sylara was not the wary, conflicted woman from the training yard. She was a tempest, a blur of lethal grace. Her knives, which he hadn't even known she carried, flashed in the moonlight. She moved like a phantom, her fighting style nothing like the pack's brawling. It was precise, efficient, deadly. She dispatched one attacker with a slash to the throat, spun, and buried a blade in the heart of another who was charging Dracor's exposed back.
She saved his life. The world narrowed to the two of them, fighting back to back, a seamless dance of savage lethality. Together, they turned the tide. The remaining Frostfang warriors, seeing their advantage lost, broke and fled into the darkness, dragging a wounded Ryden with them. Silence descended, broken only by the groans of the dying. Dracor stood panting, his wounds burning, and stared at her. She was covered in blood. Some of it hers, most of it not, her eyes blazing with a feral light. She had not hesitated. She had not flinched. She had defended him, her captor. In that bloody, quiet clearing, the last of his walls crumbled. The disquiet, the irritation, the calculated distance. It all burned away, leaving only a raw, staggering truth. He trusted her. Completely. "My mother," he said, the words tasting strange on his tongue. "She was like you." Sylara looked at him, her eyes wide with confusion. "She was rogue-born," he continued, the secret he had guarded for a lifetime finally breaking free. "Proud, defiant, the High Council cast her out. I was a child. I promised her I would build a world that would never break someone like her again. That is why I saved you."
Chapter 13. The Price of Defiance. His confession hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge built over a chasm of secrets, My mother, she was like you. The words replayed in her mind, changing the shape of everything she thought she knew about the ruthless alpha of the Blackwood Pack. He wasn't just her captor anymore. He was the son of a rogue, a man haunted by a promise. It was a vulnerability she never expected, a crack in his armor that drew her in against her will. That fragile quiet was shattered by the arrival of the High Council. They came like a storm gathering on the horizon, 3 ancient alphas, their faces carved with the arrogance of centuries, their power a palpable pressure that made the very stones of the fortress feel cold. They didn't request an audience. They demanded it. They stood in the center of the great hall, their silver and gold robes a stark contrast to the hall's dark, rugged stone. Solara stood in the shadows behind Dracor's throne, feeling like a field mouse caught between 3 ancient lions. Alpha Dracor, the eldest began, his voice like grinding stones. We have come to resolve this unpleasantness with the Frostfang pack. War between 2 of the northern packs weakens us all, and the whispers of it have already reached our enemies in the south. Dracor sat on his throne, his face impassive, a king of stone and shadow. Then tell Alpha Valerius to call off his dogs. The second envoy, a severe-looking she-wolf, stepped forward. Valerius is a fool, but his pride has been wounded. He has the loyalty of his pack. The council has a more elegant solution. She paused, and her cold, dismissive eyes flicked to where Solara stood. Give us the girl. Ice flooded Solara's veins. She is the source of the conflict, the elder continued, his tone one of reasonable logic. A rogue of no consequence. Hand her over to Valerius. He can do with her what he will. His honor will be satisfied, the war will be averted, and the northern packs will be secure. The third envoy smiled, a thin, predatory expression. In return for your cooperation, the High Council is prepared to offer you the title of High Alpha of the North. All the packs in this region, under your command. A dynasty, Dracor. All for the price of 1 stray. The offer hung in the air, glittering and venomous. Power. An empire. Everything a man like him could ever want. Solara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the ultimate test. He was a pragmatist, a ruthless leader. He saved her because of a promise, but would he sacrifice a kingdom for it? Of course not. She was a pawn, and she was about to be sacrificed. She prepared to run, to fight, to die on her feet. Dracor was silent for a long, torturous moment. Then he slowly leaned forward on his throne. A low sound rumbled in his chest. A sound that wasn't human. A deep, menacing growl that made the very air vibrate. He rose to his full, intimidating height. You come into my home, he said, his voice dangerously soft. You stand on my lands, and you dare to ask for what is mine? He slammed his fist down on the arm of his stone throne. A spiderweb of cracks shot through the solid granite. A shard of it exploded outward, whistling past the eldest envoy's ear. She stays, Dracor snarled, his eyes glowing with a terrifying silver light. There is your answer. Now get out of my territory before I forget my respect for your age. The envoys stared, their ancient arrogance finally cracking in the face of his raw, untamed fury. They turned and swept from the hall, their silence more menacing than any threat. The eldest paused at the door, his voice a cold whisper on the wind. You have chosen this day, Dracor. You have chosen to stand with a stray against your own kind. The council will not forget this. You stand alone. Chapter 14. The Venom Shift. He stood alone. The council's threat echoed in the silence of his fortress. Dracor felt the weight of his decision settle on his shoulders, heavy as a crown of stone. He had defied the High Council and drawn the battle lines not just with Frostfang, but with the entire political structure of their world. For her. Because the thought of handing her over had ignited a savage, possessive rage in him so profound it had nearly choked him. He had to know more. He had to understand what made her so important that Valerius would risk a war, and the council would try to bargain for her. He found her by the northern battlements, sharpening her knives on a whetstone, her movements fluid and precise. "The council's threat is not an idle one," he said, his voice low as he came to stand beside her. "They will sanction Frostfang, perhaps even lend them aid. We are isolated." "I'm not afraid," she said, not looking up from her blade. "I've been alone my whole life. You are not alone now." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. They felt true. A sudden warning howl from a scout on the wall shattered the moment. Dracor's head snapped up. An attack? So soon? He saw them then, a small group of warriors not in Frostfang colors moving with terrifying speed through the woods below. An ambush, here, on his doorstep. "To arms!" he roared, drawing his greatsword. He and Solara were on the wall, exposed. The attackers were scaling the ramparts with unnatural speed, led by a massive wolf shifter whose eyes burned with a fanatic's zeal. An alpha. Not Frostfang. Someone else. The fight was a brutal, chaotic explosion of violence on the narrow stone walkway. Dracor met the enemy alpha head-on, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. This new enemy was skilled, incredibly so. He moved with a grace that belied his size, his attacks relentless. Dracor took a deep cut to his side, the pain a hot, searing shock. He grunted, stumbling back. The alpha grinned, seeing his opening. The great Dracor falls. It was then that he saw Solara. She was fighting two warriors at once, a whirlwind of deadly motion. She saw him falter, saw the alpha lunging for the kill. Her face changed. A mask of pure, primal fury descended. And then, she changed. It wasn't a shift into a wolf. It was something far stranger, something he had never seen before. A flicker of blackness seemed to coat her claws, her canines elongating slightly, dripping with a dark, viscous fluid. Her eyes bled from their normal color to a solid, terrifying gold. She moved faster than he thought possible, a golden-eyed blur. She didn't try to kill the alpha. She lunged, her movements impossibly precise, and swiped her claws across his chest. 4 shallow cuts. The alpha laughed. "Is that all, little stray? A scratch?" He took another step, and froze. His eyes widened in shock. He tried to lift his sword, but his arm wouldn't obey. He tried to speak, but only a gurgle came out. A look of pure terror washed over his face as he collapsed, his body rigid and convulsing, completely paralyzed but still conscious. A neurotoxin. The pieces slammed into place in Dracor's mind with the force of a physical blow. The public rejection. The council's strange interest. The lengths their enemies would go to capture her. She wasn't just a skilled fighter. She was a biological weapon. A wolf whose venom could neutralize an alpha killer. The remaining attackers, seeing their leader fall, grabbed his paralyzed body and retreated, melting back into the woods. Dracor stared at her, his mind reeling, his side screaming in agony. She stood over the spot where the alpha fell, her claws still dripping with that black venom, her golden eyes slowly fading back to their normal hue. She looked at him, her expression dazed, as if she herself didn't fully understand what had just happened. He clutched his wounded side, the world starting to swim. Solara was all he could manage before his legs gave out.
Chapter 15. The Unraveling. She half-dragged, half-carried him back to his chambers, his blood leaving a dark trail on the cold stone floors. His weight was immense, a dead weight of muscle and bone, and her own adrenaline-fueled strength was beginning to fade, leaving a deep, trembling exhaustion in its wake. The wound in his side was deep, vicious. He was losing too much blood. She laid him on the massive bed, the same one she had woken up in, and worked with a frantic, desperate urgency. She cleaned the wound, her hands surprisingly steady. She stitched the torn flesh together with a needle and thread from a healer's kit, her movements sure and practiced from a lifetime of patching up her own injuries. He was burning up. A fever was taking hold, a product of the poison that had likely coated the enemy's blade. He tossed and turned, his powerful body racked with shivers, his mind lost in a delirious haze. His iron control was gone, completely shattered. He muttered things, broken phrases, fragments of a life he kept locked away. Mother, sorry, couldn't. And then, his eyes, glazed with fever, found hers. He reached out, his hand surprisingly strong, and tangled his fingers in her hair, pulling her closer. Mine, he rasped, his voice raw with a desperate, primal need that terrified and captivated her. Mine, to protect. His head dipped down, his lips searching for the bonding gland on her neck. He was trying to mark her, to claim her, an instinctual, fever-driven act to bind her to him, to keep her safe. No. Dracor, stop, she whispered, her heart hammering. She placed her hands on his chest, trying to push him away, but it was like trying to move a mountain. The raw power of his need was overwhelming. But she had been claimed once against her will. She would not let it happen again. Stop! Her voice, sharp and clear, seemed to cut through his delirium for a moment. He froze, his teeth a hair's breadth from her skin. A look of profound confusion washed over his face. He blinked, and then his eyes rolled back and he collapsed into a dead faint against the pillows. She sat there for a long time, her body trembling, her mind reeling. Seeing behind his mask, hearing that raw, unfiltered possession in his voice. It hadn't just scared her. It had touched a deep, lonely part of her soul that she didn't even know existed. Days later, the fever broke. He was weak, but his mind was clear. The tension between them was a thick, suffocating thing. They didn't speak of what happened, they didn't have to. It was there, in every shared glance, in every careful silence. The breaking point came over something stupid, something small. She was cutting bread for a meal when the knife slipped, slicing a deep gash across her palm. Blood welled up, dark and red. She cursed under her breath. Dracor, who had been sitting by the fire, was on his feet in an instant. His head snapped toward her. His eyes locked onto the blood, and he unraveled. It wasn't a sound a man could make. A deafening, room-shaking roar of pure, unrestrained fury ripped from his chest. His eyes ignited, blazing with a silver light so intense it was painful to look at. The air crackled with his power. It wasn't anger at her. It was a violent, primal rage for her, at the sight of her pain, at the sight of her blood. "Who did this?" he bellowed, his voice distorting with his barely contained shift. "No one. I did it myself. It was an He didn't hear her. He smashed his fist into the stone wall beside him, leaving a crater in the solid rock. The mate bond, raw and untamed, was in complete control. He was a force of nature, a storm of protective instinct. Suddenly, the chamber door burst open. A scout, his face pale with terror and haste, stumbled into the room, barely noticing the Alpha's rage. "Alpha!" he gasped, his eyes wide with fear. "They're here! A combined army, Frostfang, and their allies! They're marching on the fortress! Thousands of them!"
Chapter 16. The Poisoned Blade. War was not a single roaring thing. It was 1,000 moments of terror stacked one on top of the other, the shriek of steel on steel, the wet, tearing sound of claws on flesh, the smell of blood and fear, so thick it was a taste on the back of her tongue. The battle for the fortress had begun. Silera fought beside Dracor on the high battlements, a whirlwind of deadly grace against his tide of brutal, overwhelming force. They moved together, a seamless dance of destruction. He was a bastion of stone and fury. She was the flashing blade in the shadows beside him. For the first time in her life, she was not fighting for survival. She was fighting for something more. For the pack that had grudgingly accepted her. For the future she was just beginning to believe might be possible. For him, that single, terrifying thought was a brand on her soul. She watched his back, her instincts screaming, her entire being focused on his survival. The mate bond was a living thing between them now, a current of shared adrenaline, shared fury, shared fear. Then, through the chaos, she saw him. Raiden, the traitor. His face was a mask of pure, venomous hatred, his eyes fixed on Dracor's exposed back. And in his hand was a dagger unlike any she had ever seen. It was forged from black, pitted metal that seemed to drink the very light, its edge weeping a thin, oily purple fluid. Poison. Everything slowed down. The screams of the dying faded to a distant hum. The clash of swords became a slow, rhythmic tolling of a funeral bell. Raiden lunged. Dracor was occupied parrying a blow from another attacker, completely unaware of the death that flew toward his back. There was no time to shout, no time to think. There was only instinct, mind to protect. She threw herself into the path of the blade. It wasn't a sharp pain. It was a sudden, shocking cold that plunged deep into her side, a cold that immediately began to burn. A fire of ice that spread through her veins with terrifying speed. She gasped, the air leaving her lungs in a choked rush. Raiden's eyes widened in shock and fury at his mistake. Dracor turned, his own eyes widening, his face transforming from a mask of battle rage to one of pure, absolute horror. No. The word was a strangled whisper. The world began to tilt, the edges of her vision dissolving into a gray, swimming haze. She could feel the poison working, a paralyzing chill creeping up her limbs, silencing her heart one beat at a time. She stumbled, her knees buckling. Dracor caught her. His roar of pure, soul-shattering agony was the last thing she heard clearly. As the darkness rushed in to claim her, she felt a strange, sharp pressure on her neck. A searing heat. Possession. A final, desperate, hopeless claim. His teeth sinking into her flesh as she fell into the abyss. Chapter 17. The glowing mark. He carried her through the carnage, a red haze of fury blinding him to the world. The battle raging on the walls, the screams of his warriors, the faces of his enemies. None of it mattered. The only thing that existed was the impossibly light, terrifyingly still weight of Sylara in his arms. He had claimed her. In a moment of sheer, grief-stricken desperation on the blood-soaked stones of his fortress, he had bitten her. He had marked her as his mate, a primal, possessive act that screamed, "Mine," to the uncaring heavens. He burst into the healer's chambers, his voice a thunderous roar that shook the very foundations. "Ilara! Now!" The old pack doctor, her hands already stained with the blood of other warriors, rushed to his side. Her calm professional demeanor faltered when she saw Sylara's pale, still face. He laid her gently on a cot, his hands trembling with a violence he could barely contain. And then he saw it. On her neck, where his teeth had sunk into her skin, there was no bloody wound. Instead, an intricate swirling pattern of silver light was spreading across her skin, a glowing mark like a celestial constellation. It pulsed with a soft, ethereal light, a thing of impossible beauty born from his utter despair. The mate bond had settled. It was real. It was complete. "Alpha." Ilara's voice was a grim whisper as she examined the wound in Sylara's side. The flesh around it was turning a bruised, necrotic black. What was she struck with? A black dagger, coated in something purple and oily, he rasped, his eyes never leaving Sylara's face. Ilara's own face went pale. By the ancients. Archon's kiss. Dracor felt the blood freeze in his veins. Archon's kiss wasn't just a poison. It was a myth, a legend, a substance brewed with magic and death, said to kill even an alpha within hours, a poison with no cure. "No," he snarled, a desperate, wounded sound. "There must be something, an herb, a ritual, anything." "There is nothing." Ilara's voice was firm, though her eyes were filled with pity. "I am sorry, my alpha. It attacks the body and the soul. It unravels the victim from the inside out. All we can do is make her comfortable. She has hours, perhaps less. Hours." The word was a death sentence, He had just found her, just admitted to himself what she was to him. The bond had just settled, a glowing promise of a future, and now it was to be ripped away. The hope he hadn't even realized he was holding on to was brutally extinguished, leaving nothing but an aching, hollow void. He sank to his knees beside the cot, his strength finally deserting him. He took her hand. It was already so cold. He watched the shallow, almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest, and the memory of his mother's last days washed over him. The same stillness, the same slow, inexorable fading. The sounds of the battle outside were a distant, meaningless echo. What good was a fortress if it couldn't protect her? What good was an alpha if he couldn't save his mate? He was going to lose her, and there was nothing he could do but watch. Chapter 18. The crucible time ceased to have meaning. Dracor sat beside her, a statue carved from grief, while the sounds of his crumbling kingdom filtered through the thick stone walls. He held her hand, the cold of her skin a terrifying echo of the ice that was encasing his own heart. The glowing mark on her neck still pulsed with a soft silver light, a beautiful, tragic mockery of the life that was slipping away from her. Every shallow breath she took was a countdown. Every beat of his own heart was a hammer blow of failure. He had spent his entire life building this fortress, this pack, this reputation as a ruthless, untouchable alpha. All of it was a shield, forged in the fires of his childhood grief. He had promised his mother he would build a world where the strong protected the defiant, not punished them. He had equated strength with power, with armies, with stone walls and sharp steel. He had amassed it all, believing it would make him strong enough to keep his promise. What a fool he had been. He couldn't protect his mother from the council's judgment, and now he couldn't protect his mate from a single drop of poison. His power was a useless illusion. His walls were a cage, his entire life's work, a catastrophic failure. The ruthless alpha was nothing but a frightened boy, watching the one person he cared about die, just like before. He was utterly, completely powerless. The despair was absolute, a black, silent ocean that filled his lungs and drowned his soul. There was no rage left, no fight, just the cold, crushing weight of his own futility. Her breathing hitched, a tiny, stuttering gasp. He looked down. Her chest was still. Her lips, slightly parted, released no air. Silence. No. The word was a silent scream in his mind. No, please. This was it. The end. He had lost. With a trembling hand, a final desperate act of love and farewell, he reached out and gently touched the glowing mark on her neck. He traced the silver swirls with his fingertips, pouring all of his grief, his regret, his useless love into that one final touch. And the mark flared. It didn't just pulse. It exploded with brilliant, blinding silver light. The light surged from his fingertips, from the mark itself, racing across her skin in a luminous web. It traced her veins, illuminating her from within like a dying star reigniting. She gasped, a sharp, ragged intake of air that was loud in the silent room. Her back arched off the cot. The silver light burned with the heat of a forge, and a low, keening sound escaped her lips. Ilara burst into the room, her eyes wide. "What is happening?" "I don't know," he choked out. The black, necrotic flesh around her wound began to hiss and steam, as if touched by a holy fire. The silver light pulsed in time with his own frantic heartbeat, a rhythm of two souls fighting as one. Her unique healing, her strange, hybrid physiology. It was fighting. But it wasn't enough on its own. It was their bond, the raw, untamed power of a true mate bond, supercharged by his own alpha energy pouring into her through his touch, that was fueling it. It was a crucible, burning away the poison with a power that defied all known laws of nature. Her chest rose again, this time with a deep, steady breath. And another. She wasn't healed. Not yet. The fight was far from over. But as he knelt there, his hand still pressed to her glowing skin, a single, impossible spark of hope was ignited in the absolute darkness. Their bond wasn't just a mark of love. It was her only chance at
Chapter
survival.
19. The Bond as a Weapon. Waking up was like surfacing from a deep, dark ocean. The pain was a ghost, a memory that haunted the edges of her body, but the poison's icy grip was gone. The first thing she felt, before she even opened her eyes, was him, Dracor. He wasn't just a presence beside her anymore. He was a warmth in her mind, a steady, rhythmic hum that echoed her own heartbeat. The bond, supercharged by their fight for her life, was no longer a subtle pull. It was an open channel, a bridge between their souls. She opened her eyes and met his. He was sitting beside her, his face etched with exhaustion, but his stormy eyes were clear and filled with a raw, breathtaking relief. "You're back," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here," she confirmed, her own voice weak but steady. Through the bond, she could feel the wave of his relief as if it were her own, a warm, flooding sensation that chased away the last of the shadows. It was more than just feelings that passed between them. As his healers gave him reports of the siege outside, of the enemy army camped at their gates, she felt his thoughts, not the words themselves, but the shapes of them, the sharp edges of his strategic mind, the heavy weight of his responsibility. And she felt something else, a flicker from the outside. "They're overconfident," she said suddenly, her voice gaining strength. Dracor looked at her, his brow furrowed. "How do you know?" "I can feel it." She closed her eyes, concentrating on the bond, using it like a lens. It was strange, like tuning into a faint signal. "Kale. He's in command. He thinks he's already won. He's arrogant, sloppy. He's left a weakness in their western flank." She could feel his smugness, a faint, greasy slick of emotion from the enemy lines. But there was another presence she could sense through him, something colder and more calculating, a shadow behind Kale's throne. It was an unsettling, chilling feeling. Dracor's eyes widened as he realized what she was saying. The bond wasn't just a connection. It was an advantage, a weapon. "A targeted strike," he murmured, his mind immediately seizing on the tactical possibility. "A decapitation. They'll expect you to lead the defense from the front gate," she continued, a new, brutal plan forming between them, a creation of his strategy and her insight. "A full frontal assault, but we give them something else." A new energy surged through her, a product of the bond and her own unyielding will. She was weak, her body still a fragile, aching thing. But her spirit was on fire. She was no longer a victim in this story. She was a fighter. She was his mate. And she would see this through to the bloody end. Because they had taken everything from her, and now she was going to take it all back. He helped her to her feet, his strength flowing into her, steadying her. Together, they walked from the healing chambers and into the great hall, where the battered, exhausted remnants of his pack waited for their alpha to tell them how they were going to die. But they weren't going to die. They were going to fight.
Chapter 20. The True Luna. He looked out at the faces of his pack, and for the first time in his reign as alpha, he did not have the words they needed. He saw despair in the slump of their shoulders, in the hollows of their eyes. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. The High Council had abandoned them. They were an island, and the sea was coming to swallow them whole. He could give them orders. He could command them to fight and die with honor. It was what they expected. But as he stood before them, Silara leaning against his side for support, her warmth a steady, defiant presence, he realized they didn't need a commander. They needed a cause. They needed the hope she had ignited in him. Following the current of a sudden, certain instinct, he turned to her. Her eyes met his, and in their depths he saw not a wounded stray, but a queen. He dipped his head in a gesture of deference that sent a shockwave of murmurs through the hall. "Speak to them," he murmured, his voice for her alone. "Tell them what we're fighting for." She hesitated for only a second. Then she took a shaky step forward, her chin held high. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it was clear, and it cut through the despairing silence like a shard of glass. "I am not one of you," she began, her words stark and honest. "I was born a rogue. I have lived my whole life alone, trusting no one, belonging nowhere." He watched, filled with a pride so fierce it almost choked him, as every warrior in the hall focused on her. "The Frostfang pack, they told you I was filth, that I was a weakness, a taint." A flicker of the old fire ignited in her eyes. "They were wrong. I am not a weakness. And neither are you." Her voice grew stronger, imbued with a passion that came from a place of deep, undeniable truth. "I have seen how you fight. I have seen how you stand for one another. This fortress is not just stone and wood. It is a home. The first place, the only place, that has ever felt like one to me." She pushed herself away from his side, standing on her own, her fragile body radiating an impossible strength. "They want to take your home. They want to break your spirit. They want to make you kneel before a tyrant who thinks honor is a stage play and loyalty is a commodity." She pointed a trembling finger toward the main gate. "I am a rogue, but I will fight for this pack. I will fight for this home. I will fight for my alpha." Her gaze found his, and the raw devotion in her eyes struck him like a physical blow. "I am not asking you to fight for a stray," she cried, her voice ringing through the hall. "I am asking you to fight for yourselves, for the warrior standing beside you, for Blackwood." Silence. Then, one of his oldest warriors, a grizzled veteran named Bjorn, drew his sword. The sheeting of steel was deafening in the quiet hall. He slammed its pommel against his breastplate. Thump, thump. "For Blackwood!" he roared. Another warrior drew their blade, then another, and another, until every single shifter in the hall had their weapon drawn, their eyes blazing with a new, ferocious light. They were not broken. They were not defeated. They were reborn in the fire of her words. They began to chant her name. Not stray, not rogue. "Silara! Silara! Silara!" She was their Luna, and they were ready to follow her into hell. Otter, Chapter 21. The eve of battle. The moments before the final battle were strangely quiet. A hush had fallen over the fortress, a deep, collective breath before the plunge. Silara stood with Dracor in the armory, the air thick with the smell of polished steel and whetstone dust. He adjusted the leather straps on her armor, his movements sure and steady, his knuckles brushing against her skin. It was an intimate, gentle gesture in a world about to explode into violence. "You are certain about this?" he asked, his stormy eyes searching hers. "The main assault will be brutal. My place is there." "And my place is in the shadows," she replied, her voice firm. "Kale won't expect me. He thinks I'm a broken thing cowering behind you. Let him keep thinking it. His arrogance is the weapon we're going to use against him." He nodded, his jaw tight. The bond between them was a taut wire of shared purpose, shared fear, and a fierce, unspoken love. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. "No matter what happens out there," he whispered, "find your way back to me." "Always," she promised, her voice thick. And then they parted. He went to the main gate, a king of wolves ready to lead his people in a desperate final stand. She slipped out a hidden postern gate with a small, elite team of the pack's swiftest warriors, melting into the pre-dawn gloom. The battle began with a roar. From her vantage point on the wooded cliffs overlooking the battlefield, she watched as Dracor's forces slammed into the Frostfang army. It was a terrifying, beautiful sight. A wave of black-furred wolves crashing against a tide of silver and gray. The sound was a physical thing, a chaotic symphony of howls, screams, and the brutal clang of steel. Dracor was a god of war in the center of it all, his great sword a blur of silver, his warriors fighting with the ferocity of cornered lions. It was the diversion she needed. "Now," she whispered to her team, They moved like ghosts along the enemy's exposed flank, using the chaos of the main battle as cover. Their target was the command tent, a large ornate pavilion set on a rise behind the main lines. It was heavily guarded, but its defenders were all facing the battle, their attention fixed on Dracor's ferocious assault. They slipped past the sentries, a whisper of movement, a flicker of shadow. Silara's heart pounded a steady, cold rhythm in her chest. This wasn't the rage of the cage match or the desperate fury of the ambushes. This was something different, a cold, focused certainty, the purpose she had been born for. They reached the edge of the command encampment. Through a gap in the tents, she could see him. Kael. He stood over a battle map, looking proud and untouchable, a golden prince directing his toy soldiers. He was smiling, as if feeling the weight of her stare. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the shadows. For a single electric moment, his cold gray eyes locked with hers across the chaos. The smile on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. Then, a slow, arrogant smirk. He thought she was a fly, coming to be swatted. He had no idea he was looking at his doom.
Chapter 22. Kings and Killers. The world narrowed to the space between her and Kyle. The roaring battlefield became a distant, muted symphony of violence. He stood before her, a golden prince in flawless silver armor, a cruel, dismissive smirk on his perfect face. "So, the stray crawls back for more," he taunted, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Did you enjoy your time in the dirt? It's where you belong." She didn't answer with words. She answered with speed. She lunged, not with a wild, angry charge, but with the cold, deadly precision of an executioner. Her knives were a blur of silver, aimed not to kill, but to dismantle. She sliced the straps of his ornate pauldrons, sheared the buckles from his greaves. She moved around him like a phantom, her every strike peeling away a layer of his princely armor, leaving him exposed. "You called me filth," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous as she ducked under his clumsy, infuriated swing. "You called me weak." She sliced a shallow, stinging cut across his cheek, mirroring the one he'd given her with his words. "I rejected you," he screamed, his handsome face twisting into a mask of pure, childish rage. "You are nothing!" "No," she said, her voice ringing with a power he could never understand as she finally disarmed him, sending his sword spinning into the mud. She kicked his feet out from under him, sending him sprawling onto his back. She placed the tip of her blade against his throat. "I reject you. I reject your weakness. I reject your cruelty. I reject your empty, hollow pride." His eyes widened with fear, finally understanding. He wasn't a king. He was just a boy, and he was about to die.
He was a storm of righteous fury. Dracor's greatsword rose and fell, a scythe reaping a harvest of his enemies. He fought for his pack, for his home, for the future he now dared to see with Silara by his side. A warrior, larger and faster than the rest, met him head-on, their blades clashing with enough force to make the ground tremble. "You fight well for a man about to lose everything," the warrior snarled, his voice strangely familiar. "You will not have this fortress," Dracor roared, pushing him back. The warrior laughed, a cold, chilling sound. He pulled off his helmet and Dracor felt the blood freeze in his veins. The face was older, crueler, but the features were a twisted mirror of his own, his father's bastard son, his half-brother. "Riker," Dracor breathed in disbelief. "Hello, little brother," Riker sneered. "Did you enjoy my game? Kale was so easy to manipulate. All I had to do was whisper in his ear about the tainted rogue with the hidden power, and he arranged the whole tragic play himself. All to weaken you, to isolate you. When you are dead, the council will give me your lands, and I will finally take what is mine by right." Riker lunged, his blade slick with the same black poison that had nearly killed Silara. Dracor parried, but he was tired, his existing wounds aching. Riker was faster. The poisoned blade slipped past his guard and sliced deep into his thigh. Pain, searing and immediate, shot up his leg. He stumbled.
She felt his pain through the bond, a sudden, white-hot spike of agony that was not her own. She whirled around, leaving a terrified, weeping Kyle in the mud. Her eyes scanned the battlefield and found him. Dracor, on one knee, and a monster standing over him, a monster with Dracor's face. Something inside her snapped. The beast she had kept chained her whole life didn't just stir. It broke free. Her vision bled to gold. The venom, black and shimmering, coated her claws, her fangs. She wasn't just a wolf anymore. She was a weapon. She was a predator, and they had hurt her mate. She crossed the battlefield in a silent, golden-eyed blur. Riker never saw her coming. One moment he was gloating over a kneeling Dracor, the next she was on him. She didn't use her knives. She used her claws, slashing him across the chest. Not deep, just enough. He staggered back, laughing. Another stray to put down. His words choked off. He froze, his eyes wide with the same terror she had seen on the Alpha Scout. The paralysis took hold, and he collapsed, a statue of impotent rage. She turned to Dracor, the golden light in her eyes softening as she helped him to his feet. He leaned on her, his breathing ragged. Together, he rasped. Together, they stood over the paralyzed, helpless form of the true villain. The war was not over. But the king had fallen. Chapter 23. The quiet after. The silence after the final scream was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The war was over. Riker was in chains, Kale had surrendered, and the Frostfang army had broken, fleeing back to their own lands in disarray. But victory did not feel triumphant. It felt heavy. It smelled of blood and rain and cooling earth. It sounded like the low, broken sobs of those searching for their loved ones among the fallen. Celera moved through the aftermath, a ghost in the gray dawn. She was no longer just a fighter. She was a Luna. The title felt strange, foreign, but the duties felt right. She knelt beside a young warrior whose arm was laid open to the bone, her hands moving with a practiced calm to bind the wound. The warrior looked at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and pure, unadulterated reverence. "Luna," he whispered, the word a prayer. She simply nodded, a lump forming in her throat. For the first time since she had crossed into this territory, no one looked at her with suspicion. They looked at her with gratitude, with loyalty, with hope. She wasn't the stray anymore. She was one of them. She was home. She found Dracor near the main gate, directing the grim work of rebuilding their shattered defenses. He moved with a limp from Riker's poisoned blade, but he stood tall, an unwavering pillar of strength for his people. He saw her, and the weight on his shoulders seemed to lift for a moment. He came to her, ignoring the flurry of activity around them. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and gently brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. His touch was a question, an affirmation, a promise. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of her own exhaustion, her own grief, her own deep, bone-weary relief. They stood together for a long moment, a silent island in the sea of sorrow and reconstruction. They had survived. They had won. And now, the hard work began. Later, inside the healer's tent, they worked side by side. They cleaned wounds, offered water, and spoke words of comfort to the wounded. They moved in a seamless, unspoken rhythm, a true Alpha and Luna pair, their bond a quiet, steadying presence that seemed to soothe the very air around them. As she finished stitching a cut on an old warrior's brow, he looked up at her, his gaze clear. "We followed him for his strength," the old wolf rasped, nodding toward Dracor. "But we will follow you for your heart, Luna Solara." She looked across the tent at Dracor. He had heard, and he was smiling, a true, unguarded smile that transformed his harsh face into something breathtakingly beautiful. In that moment, surrounded by the cost of their victory, she finally understood. Strength and kindness didn't have to be enemies. They could be two sides of the same coin, two halves of the same
Chapter
soul.
24. The sanctuary weeks turned into a season of healing. The fortress walls were rebuilt, stronger than before. The dead were honored and laid to rest in the quiet grove beyond the fortress. A fragile peace, brokered by a chastened high council, settled over the northern lands. But it was a different kind of rebuilding that occupied Dracor's mind. He stood with Solara on a windswept hill overlooking a ruin. It was all that was left of a small stone house and a walled garden, a place he had not visited in over 20 years. The memory of it was a sharp, painful thing. The scent of his mother's healing herbs, the sound of her laughter, the warmth of a home that had been ripped away from him. It had been her sanctuary, a place where she offered shelter and healing to any rogue-born pup who found their way to her door. After the council had cast her out, the place had been abandoned, left to crumble into a monument of his failure. Now looking at it through new eyes, he didn't see failure. He saw a foundation. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice quiet. He felt Solara's hand slip into his, her warmth a steady anchor against the ghosts of the past. "It's beautiful," she whispered, though all that remained were a few crumbling walls and a wild, overgrown garden. But she saw it. She saw what it could be. "I want to rebuild it," he said, the decision settling in his soul with a sense of profound rightness. Not just the building, the idea. A true sanctuary for rogue-born children, a place where they will be safe, cared for, taught that their birth does not define their worth. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "Our first decree, as Alpha and Luna of the Blackwood Pack." Her answering smile was brighter than the sun. The work was slow, but it was filled with a joy he had never known. Their pack warriors, the same ones who had once viewed all outsiders with suspicion, worked willingly, clearing stones and cutting timber. They were not just rebuilding a house, they were rebuilding the very soul of their pack. One afternoon, Dracor stood watching as Solara sat in the middle of the half-finished garden, showing a small, shy wolf pup how to braid wildflowers into a crown. She was so patient, so gentle. The pup, who had arrived terrified and snarling a week ago, was now looking at her with wide, adoring eyes. He saw his mother so clearly in that moment, it stole his breath away. The same quiet strength, the same fierce compassion, the same defiant belief that even the lost things deserved kindness. His promise to her had not been about building an army or a fortress. It had been about building this, a world where a scene like the one before him was possible. He walked over and sat beside her in the grass. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a comfortable, familiar gesture. "She would have loved you," he said, the words simple, but carrying the weight of his entire life. "My mother. She would have seen the queen in you from the very beginning."
Chapter 25. The blood moon promise piece was a strange, unfamiliar cloak to wear. For the first time in her life, Solara felt its weight, a warm, comfortable heaviness that settled deep in her bones. She stood on the high balcony of their chambers, leaning back against Dracor's solid chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. Below them, the Blackwood territory was asleep under the eerie, crimson light of a blood moon. The war was a memory. The sanctuary was thriving. She had a home, a pack, a mate whose soul was so deeply intertwined with hers, she no longer knew where she ended, and he began. "It's quiet," she murmured, her voice filled with a soft wonder. "For now," he rumbled, his lips brushing against her hair. He held her tighter, his chin resting on top of her head. He was silent for a long moment, and she could feel the deep, steady beat of his heart against her back. "They call me the Ruthless Alpha," he whispered, his voice a low, intimate vibration that was for her alone. "They talk of my fortress of stone and my heart of ice." He turned her in his arms to face him, his stormy gray eyes dark with an emotion so intense it made her breath catch. "They have no idea," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "They have no idea what I would burn, who I would kill, What world I would destroy. For you. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperate, feverish passion like before. It was a kiss of profound, soul-deep certainty. It was a promise. A vow. A seal on the forever they had fought so hard to win. It was the quiet, perfect end to their story. Or so she thought. The soft tread of footsteps behind them broke the spell. Gareth, Dracor's beta, stood in the doorway, his face pale and grim. He looked deeply uncomfortable, as if he was about to deliver the worst news of his life. Alpha, Luna, he began, his voice strained. A messenger has arrived. He rode through 3 territories to get here. He bears the sigil of an alpha long thought dead. Dracor's arms tightened around her, his whole body going rigid with a protective tension. What is it, Gareth? Who is this messenger from? Gareth took a deep breath and looked directly at Solara, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and pity. He claims your father, Alpha Vane, is alive, he said, the words dropping like stones into the perfect silence. And he wants his daughter back.